Welcome back, Sleepyheads, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Sleepy Aliens Perspective. I'm your host, H. Lee, and of course, I have some things to say about Jeffrey Epstein. I have a lot of things to say, and I have not gone through all of those files. I have not gone fully down that rabbit hole. There's so many tidbits that I see people plucking from the files online, but this is what I want to focus on for this episode. When we think of Jeffrey Epstein, government cover-up, and elite child ST, my thought is, how did we get here? Because we know there's other Jeffrey Epsteins out there. There's been cases in America going back to the 1970s that involves politicians, police officials, school administrators, church leaders. The rabbit hole is so deep, but there's been a long history of very powerful people within communities and within this country that have been involved in child ST rings. And Jeffrey Epstein is just, that case that really, really cracks the egg. And it's great to see so many people waking up to that reality. But I really want to dive into how we got here. So as I've stated several times throughout my videos, I believe the child ST cannot survive without poverty. Poverty is at the core of so many of our societal issues that we face today. And those in power understand how much of their lifestyle that they live and the crimes that they commit need poverty in order to maintain itself, right? So my theory is that the learned cultural exploitation of enslaved children and children in poverty laid the foundation for modern ST. And in many countries, and of course even in America, a tourist can fly out here, get a great hotel, stay at a nice resort, do some sightseeing, and they can even find a pimp, a brothel, or an organization servicing PDF files. But when did this become an issue? How did we get here? Now, some could say that it was the Babylonian era that really started, the child SA and ST. But most researchers who have studied that era have only found mainly that there was just the child sacrifices, and children being burned alive, to pay worship to these deities and these gods that they were worshiping back then. So instead of the Babylonian era, I really believe the root of it is ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I think more of it was becoming very evident in Rome, and that's when we saw a huge cultural shift, which, leaders wanted to actually focus on protecting children. But we know that a lot of American culture is modeled after ancient Greece and Rome. We have the sports, the politics, education, sororities, fraternities, and the modern workforce. I mean, even back then, the most vulnerable children, the enslaved ones, they were facing relentless SA by free men of elite status. And it is believed by some researchers that prior to Christian emperors in ancient Rome, child exploitation was overt and socially acceptable. Seneca, who was an advisor to Roman Emperor Nero, and he was also a tutor, was one of the first to publicly condemn the acts of violence against enslaved boys. So Seneca referred to these boys as luckless boys. Roman Emperor Hadrian, he was a proud and public person when it came to his deep love for his teenage lover Antinous. In ancient Rome, a simple banquet that required boy slaves to serve food and wine often ended up with mass child SA. And while a lot of information that I uncovered focused on enslaved boys, I have no doubt that enslaved girls were being equally as exploited and forced into brothel, can I say sex? Brothel sex work. I don't know. But yes, so on a whole front, it was boys and girls suffering, but the boys in particular seemed to be a favorite of the time for those elite ancient Roman leaders and political figures. In the Elizabethan era, the very foundations of child exploitation in the entertainment industry were made very evident. So, academic and researcher Dr. Bart Van Es uncovered that Queen Elizabeth I sanctioned child abductions to support the theater industry. This really blew my mind because I tell you, this is exactly what the American entertainment industry was built off of. This very model and principle. So I'm telling you, children were literally being abducted off the streets, and it was legal for those children to be taken. And parents would go and basically petition to the police and the court and asking, I want my child back. My child has been taken. And they say, no, your child needs to work in the theater. So these abducted children, they were mainly boys, they were forced to become actors. The plays the boys acted in were often more sexually explicit than the plays featuring adults, and the boys were often required to play female roles. And the audience members for these plays were predominantly men. So shocking, right? I mean, the entertainment industry is so tried and true. This blew my mind when I was reading this. And these child victims that we all know and see these days that are somehow trying to regain their sanity and their life back. I mean, this pattern spans back centuries. Did you know that in the 1980s that LA was considered the epicenter for the child porn market? But I don't want to get too off track, but I've been reading a book, and there was a sergeant who was running the very first child juvenile police unit, and basically the runaways during that time period were becoming such a burden on the police department. They became the first juvenile task force in the entire country, and this sergeant was talking about how he became aware of the runaways being trafficked, essentially. And he had mentioned, the facts of the Los Angeles being the epicenter for child porn and, other exploitation. But again, not getting off track. So that's the Elizabethan era. Let's fast forward to 1619. And of course, thus begins the 400 years of Black enslavement in America. So while slavery itself was sadistic and the epitome of inhumanity and exploitation in America, the child SA and ST of enslaved children were daily occurrences. So much so to the point of white people putting ads in newspapers describing the need for a particular kind of child slave, boy or girl. Now, many researchers believe these ads were sexual in nature because normally if a white person were to be requesting a slave and in the newspaper, they would just say right out, I want a cook, I want a seamstress, I want a farmhand. But these ads, which they believed were sexual in nature, they were particularly vague. Very much so like something you'd see on Craigslist, on those back pages back in the day or something. So I thought that was really interesting to learn. And of course, when we think about how child slaves were forced to, breed and all that other stuff, that's very apparent. But the fact that back then, they were taking out ads, requesting it, and from there, children were being trafficked from one plantation to another, I think that says a lot. And of course, this was happening with Native American children as well, because we know that they were being put into schools and also ending up in slavery as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And of course, these boy and girl slaves were, also being subjected to a lot of sexual sadists as well. I mean, this part of history continues the thread of evidence showing that those in power, taking advantage of the vulnerable, poor, and enslaved. So we've seen it, in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the Elizabethan era, and now, we're in America and we're seeing the same thing. So Poverty is power to these people. I mean, that's why so many states and communities rely on communities to come together for social welfare and to help the hungry and the houseless, and how it's very difficult to really get, help at a federal level when it comes to these issues. And of course, we can go down a whole rabbit hole with that, but things are the way they are for a reason. But I think it also validates the reality of institutional acceptance and cover up of these crimes. It's so embedded in culture, it's so normalized, it's hard to really get to the root of the very core of it all. But the very fact that those on the Epstein list have not been fully exposed by our federal government, whether we're talking about the FBI, CIA, Department of Justice, whatever we're talking about, or our very president, I think it proves that child SA and ST are just really a part of American institutions. And let's be honest, your government is breadcrumbing you. They are breadcrumbing us. And I've stopped eating the crumbs and I'm just kind of letting it build up so I can get one big single meal at this point. But they want us to be anxiously attached. They know that we have this need for security and action, and they have this leverage and, holding all that power, whether it's for, national security reasons or not. But your government is waiting for you to become so disillusioned from the hunger of stability that eventually the breadcrumbs will start to feel like a meal, and your tolerance for institutional emotional abuse, because that's what I believe this is, and yes, I just said that word that I shouldn't have said, but they believe that your tolerance will ultimately just continue to increase, and eventually another problem will arise that takes precedent over anything else you have going on. If the Epstein files were fully released, so would decades of cover-ups throughout this country connecting one powerful man to another, and an endless list of victims. That would have to come with that as well. Because based on the research that I've been doing from the 1970s to the 1990s, there were cases in Michigan, New Orleans, Nebraska, Texas, Washington, D.C., New York. There are numerous PDF rings that were uncovered, cowboy centers, who were servicing middle-class business personnel or corporate leaders and government officials, administrators, police officers. So this historical pattern has been going on for a long time, and we've been going around this circle for a long time. And like a lot of other spiritual issues that people have to overcome in their lives, as a society we have to overcome this cycle. And I really, really hope that the Jeffrey Epstein case will really push us out of this level that we seem to be stuck at for the past 4 or 5 decades, to be honest. And I hope that we reach this level where we're actually seeing people be held accountable. And like I've said before, for that to happen, a lot of powerful people would have to step down. A lot of chaos would break out in our country. We would have to somehow not focus on other things, which we have a lot of other major issues going on right now when it comes to ICE and inflation, the workforce. There's not enough jobs for people out here. There's just so many other things going on right now, and that's how they like it. We don't know what to focus on, and we can't focus on one thing long enough to actually reach a resolution. But I also think the truth of the Epstein files speaks to institutional ST. And when I say institutional, I mean our government has been involved in ST. And whether we want to say that's through these detention centers and people being, taken from their homes, taken from the country in which they've been living in, and then somehow ending up in a underground facility, some weird lab, or maybe they're just being pushed into brothels. Maybe they're being trafficked to other countries for wealthy people and being kept in basements. We don't know where these people are truly ending up, and that's the really scary thing about what's happening with ICE and the detention centers. And just to even think about the kids, it's terrifying. There's a lot of experimenting that could be going on. The levels to it all, you just don't know. And because these people aren't considered American citizens in the government's mind, they feel like they have this authority and this leeway just to make these people disappear, and no one's going to question where are they, what's happened. So it's very scary, and that's kind of where my mind goes. But institutional ST is a real thing, and this goes back to the MKUltra experiments, the SRA survivors, the mass brainwashing, the cloning, the breeding, the satanic cults, the sadist cults, however you want to put it, and the spiritual warfare that, most people aren't ready to acknowledge. And I think that's what the Epstein files are really revealing, and it's really exciting to see so many people waking up to this reality, because if we think about it, 6 years ago, most of the people talking about this would have been just lopped into that QAnon conspiracy pool where people just thought you were crazy, stupid, and watching too much stuff on the internet. But if you really read survivor books, if you read other text, if you go into periodical searches, newspapers, whatever it may be, you will find evidence of all of this stuff, and it's just been building up for decades. So for those who out there who are still skeptical, I don't know why, but there is just countless evidence, and I really always encourage people to find survivor books. And I always say that, Kathy O'Brien's Transformation America book is a really great start, and she is an MKUltra SRA survivor, and she really explains a lot, and her testimony provides a really in-depth perspective of institutional ST and how that has been sanctioned and protected by our government for so long. So when I think about Jay-Z, Bill Gates, or Pusha T, to me, they are just deviant pawns, and they've always been pawns, and they know that they are pawns, and that's why they worked so hard to amass as much wealth as they can to give them as much power and leverage as possible. And, that's why people buy these homes in different countries and are going to places where they can't be extradited and all that stuff. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. But, I hope nobody's shocked by, Jay-Z or Bill Gates, because Virginia Giuffre, I believe that name was coming up in her case, Bill Gates. But Jay-Z, he's had a historical interest, in teenage girls. That's not surprising. So, I don't know. The rabbit hole goes deep, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But if our government wanted us to know the truth, we would all know it by now. We wouldn't be getting these breadcrumbs. So this is just kind of an episode that I wanted to do to focus on some historical aspects of child ST that I uncovered. And I hope that's been informative. And, I'm going to be going more into some of that stuff in the upcoming episodes. But thank you so much for tuning in. I also want to say thank you to all the new subscribers that have been subscribing. I know some of my videos are long, but I want to say this in truth. If you watch my videos the whole way through, I am providing information the whole way through. I would like to make them shorter. I always work on that, but it's hard when there's just so much information out there, and it's difficult to break it all down. But Sleepyheads, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great night, and I will talk to you guys again soon.